Welcome to VolleyTalk alongside Amir Sanasin. I'm Elliot Skelly. We're joining you after the third year of the OHSAA state semifinal matchups. Some great matches today. Here, how'd you like it?
I mean, I liked it a lot. I mean, it's always great to be back in Wittenberg and again, a great venue overall. They really make sure that it is a top class venue for this event overall. Again, it's kind of shifted over the years, Capital University, Pick Central, but now this is Wittenberg's third year of doing it. And it feels like every time we come back there, it just seems to get better.
Wholeheartedly agree. So let's talk matches. We're going to talk about McNick versus St. Vincent St. Mary first. Again, McNick, the team we've been talking about all year. About hey, they're the ones that we think are going to win D2. We predicted they'd win in three. They win in three. St. Vincent St. Mary team that's gotten there four times in a row and just has not been able to get the state championship done so far. For McNick, I thought Gerhard looked the part of Player of the Year. And honestly, this took me a little bit to figure out their middles, Aiden Williams and Jace Clifton. They both played well. I kind of thought they were the same person. They look alike. I was like, they look like a little bit like Brady Jones, not quite as good, but like that level where like they have curly hair, they have the vert. They were playing well. I think that'll be a big factor in the championship match. And same with St. Mary, they were well rounded. Honestly, I was trying to pick out like who do I think like their best player is, and the stats reflect it. Like a bunch of guys had three kills. Nobody's like their main guy, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. I think they played well, but McNick just too good.
Yeah, I agree with you. Again, we expected this McNick team to be really well into this tournament. And again, it wasn't pretty when you take a look at that final score. McNick won, if you think about it in total, they won by 18 points, which was 19 points less from when they swept STVM on April 12th. So again, this was not the best McNick performance of the year. This is to some extent maybe not representative of what this McNick team can do down the stretch and what they can do tomorrow. So it will be interesting to see what can happen. And I think as the game went along, you can tell from Connor Games, his bench, and then the guys that were on the court, they were starting to get into a rhythm, right? You have a whole week off from that win against Loveland. It's really shaky to start off the first two sets, especially that second set, if you will. I think the biggest thing for me was just looking at a guy like Gerhardt. I mean, he ended out the night with 17 kills. But going into that third set, he had 9 kills, but 8 attack errors. So it was a very 50-50 battle when it came to him just landing kills and making sure he can get those points. And then all of a sudden, that third set, he gets 8 kills, only 1 attack error. So he's starting to get a little bit better, right? He's starting to get a little bit more comfortable. And you could say the same for the rest of the team, too. And that's what they're going to need tomorrow when they're facing a much tougher Mount Vernon side.
I agree there. So it'll be McNick versus Mount Vernon in the state championship match. Mount Vernon swept Nordonia. We talk about Region 7. Typically, it's, the easier team to come to state. I think Nordonia was, the best team we've seen come out of Region 7 so far. EJ Zapata, our outside, he was great. We saw him, in Player of the Year voting actually respected. Like usually the Region 7 Player of the Year will go down to like mid-second team in all state, which almost never happens in any other circumstance, but coaches just don't respect them in D2. But this year they do. They say, hey, you're good, you're legit, you're going to first team. And he played like it. He played well. Mount Vernon, Hunter Thompson. I don't know how the heck that guy's an honorable mention. He looked first team all state to me. He was great. Honestly, my only critique is I don't know why they didn't set him more. I thought there were plenty of times where like, okay, it's going to Hunter, and then set to the backside, set to the right side, and hit out of bounds. Why? You got like a 6'5" weapon over there. Just use him.
I think it was very similar to that. Credit to Nordonia. They were able to fight and they were able to, relatively speaking, make it a game. If you take a look at that final score, it was relatively close, right? No disrespect to Independence, but whenever we see these Region 7 matchups at the state tournament, you're going to have at least one set that's like a 25-10, a 25-8, where that Region 7 team just loses steam down the stretch. It felt like Nordonia, even though they were second best throughout and Mount Vernon was consistently the better team on that court, it didn't seem that much difference. It felt like Nordonia was relatively getting those points. And, even though from a physical perspective, Mount Vernon did have the taller and more athletic players, Nordonia still did a pretty good job to get those points to it, whether it was forcing errors. But again, credit to Nordonia. They played very well.
We also saw Thomas Worthington versus New Albany. Thomas Worthington ended up sweeping. Um, I thought, their passing was off for Thomas Worthington. Probably sets one and three. I think set two, you really saw like when they're using their middles, it was kind of a different game, but just weren't passing well in the first and third set. Dylan Johnson, we saw great second team All State middle. He had when he got a free swing in set two, it was like no problem. New Albany, though, they ran the middles very well out of system. There were plenty of times where the setter was like 10-foot line or past that, and then shooting up 31, and the guy was either hitting it or like tipping smartly. It worked a lot. I was. They had some youthful moments for sure. And the New Albany coaches actually, I was talking to him. He was like, "Yeah, there were some moments where we looked young out there." But I could see how they could conceivably upset Pick North, right? Like they're crafty and they're scrappy and they're a team that, maybe doesn't pound balls every time, but can, dink it over and mess you up that way. So I could see how Pick North lost to them. I do kind of wish we got to see Pick North against Thomas Worth in the playoffs, but oh well. The only other thing, the officials, man, the trash talk, stop him. Like I don't get it. Like if a guy comes down and he's like cussing somebody out, card him for sure. I get it. We want to teach people to be respectful, but like several times tonight or several times today, it was like someone would come down, get a kill, and just look at the guy for a second and then move on. And then we're stopping the game for an official warning for that. I don't see how there's any point to that. I think it's too aggressive. But what did you think of the match overall?
I think one of the biggest takeaways for me was I think it was New Albany's youthfulness, if you will, the good and the bad of it. This is, in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best team we have seen out of system. They played really, really well. And I think you have to give credit to their threaders, Saraikis, their middle, Yashas Developali. He did a really good job too, especially with setting the tone in the third set. He was able to get those kills and really establish himself in the middle against a Thomas Worthington side that's done really well through the middle themselves this year. So that was really good. Again, I think the biggest thing for me, the reason why Thomas Worthington is really able to command this, right? 25-19, 25-13 when they really turned it on against this New Albany side, and then 26-24 is the production of JT McGuire. There were chances in that game where McGuire just had a free swing. Nobody from New Albany was challenging him because he knew he was just going to pound the ball. So there were very few times where you saw a New Albany player try to go up and block or try to double block that situation. So it was very interesting to see, and it just shows you the power that JT McGuire and then also his fellow counterparts too, like Rubin and Noah May, can have in this entire offense.
Uh, we also had St. X fall to St. Ignatius in a five-set match. It was an awesome one. You were talking, we haven't seen a five-set semifinal in OHSAA history, which isn't that long, but still, this is a great match. First off, Matt Schulte was injured. One of the ESPX guys was telling me he hurt his ankle in practice, so they weren't playing him for like the first 2.5 sets, and they had like an undersized outside in at middle, and there's nothing wrong with being an undersized outside. I'm sure he's a great player on the outside, but in the middle, like it is so difficult if you're giving up like 8 inches to the guy you're going against to be effective, and I feel like that kind of showed. Eventually, they did bring him in set three. San X won the first one, San Ignatius won the second, and they were really coming ahead in the third one, like up 11-3 or something. And then Schulte's like, hey, I'll fight through it. Like, get me in there, at least give me a chance. X ended up coming searching back. Um, I will say, Will Overberger for St. Ignatius. I mean, that dude was freaking effective. I mean, like, you walk in there, you know Joe Taggart's going to be good. You know Jack Reagan's going to be good, fine. But Will Overberger, in the nicest way possible, is not the scariest looking guy I've ever seen. But there were so many times where he just put the ball down, like in key moments. I think he hit 619 on 14 kills or something like that. Like, that's incredible state semifinal performance. X came back in set four. I mean, dominated. They were up 18-9. I think they won the set 25-16. Then we go to a fifth set, deciding. Set five, like first point. It's a rally. It's like, okay, yep, free ball. Yep, it's gonna go into Joe Taggart. Joe Taggart gets blocked. And I feel like there, like the momentum kind of shifted because the feeling was, hey, he's gonna get a kill. And it's like, ooh, they stopped him. So they led, and you kind of felt like maybe Sanix was going to come back and get into it, but then midway it just fell apart, and Ignatius steamrolls and gets 15-8 done in the fifth set, and they move on to the state championship. The inevitable side out, like if you give St. X the ball, it's just going to be their point that the last year's team had was just not there today towards the end. And I've had people text me like, so like how did St. Ignatius end up stopping Joe Taggart? And I was like, honestly, I don't think that's the story of the match. I don't think beating St. X was ever about stopping Joe Taggart. He's going to get kills. He got 28 today on 60 swings, which is about as much as you can ask anyone who's not Jonah Gilbert for one guy to do. That's a pretty dang good day. But St. Ignatius just outplayed them.
I have to agree with you. And again, going back to that Taggart point, the guy put up 28 kills. He came into the state tournament averaging 5.9 kills per set. And yet, I mean, it still felt like we were trying to get some points from him, and it was just not happening. And again, credit to Saint X for everything they've done this year. And you take a look at how the rest of that team played, and you see the people that are starting to leave, such as your setter, Cam Evans. You start to think, well, is this what the Saint X team is going to look like next year when you do have a guy like Joe Taggart who's going to be leading the line? Credit to St. Ignatius for really diving into their versatility. You talk about Overberger. Another guy I want to highlight, Ethan Rossetti, too, because he
Yeah.
had double-digit kills as well. And again, Jack Reagan, pretty solid day for him, 24 kills. They really diversified their attack, St. Ignatius, and really spread it out. So it wasn't as predictable compared to what we saw with St. X. And then another thing that you mentioned, Matt Schulte, again, a guy that wears his heart on his sleeve. I remember calling his JVB matches back in 2022, a guy that really cares about St. X, really cares about the volleyball team in general. You saw that he was wearing his heart on his sleeve with every big point. It was him and Taggart that were really pushing the pace for the St. X side when they did take that fourth set 25 to 16. But again, you have to be able to be consistent, right? And I always go back to one thing that my broadcast partner at ESPX, Anthony France, once told me. And he was like, the team that wins the fourth set tends to have the momentum going into the fifth set, which I think is true from a basis standpoint. But there's so many matches we see where it is kind of a little bit of a blowout in that fourth set, such as today, where it was 25-16. The first three sets all decided by 2 points. So the Bombers handily, in ways, took that fourth set and then just couldn't replicate it in the fifth as well. And I remember watching that set today and I was thinking to myself, this reminds me of the 2022 regional final against Mullet. It was a similar situation where it was very back and forth, and then St. X lost that, or rather, they won that fourth set 25-13, and then they lost that fifth set, I believe 15-11 or 15-12. So again, you have to be able to sustain that throughout, but nonetheless, one of the best, well, first off, the best state semifinal we have seen in the OHSA era, one of the best games we've seen all season. Credit to both sides. Great match.
Absolutely. So now we get into the state championship matchups in Division Two. It's going to be Mount Vernon versus Archbishop McNicholas. What do you think is going to happen?
It's very interesting to see because you have two teams that have such an interesting vibe. And I think they kind of, play off each other a little bit. You have a McNick side that likes to play up a little bit, face some Division One competition. They've faced St. X, they faced Moeller. They're able to beat Moeller this year. So they're willing to face and play some higher competition. The same is said for Mount Vernon. Over 10 games played against Division One competition. So now you return to Division Two, and now you have to really, hone your craft and say, all right, well, these are the games that matter. This is the game that matters. I think the one thing I'll say for Mount Vernon, we did see Evan Komatau head out of the game in the second set. He had some tape on his wrist. He had to check. There was an injury timeout for a while. I don't think he returned to the game for a while, but not for much. So we'll see what his
My guess
availability
is he's
is.
going to play. I don't know.
I would think
I
so.
yeah.
I would think so. But still, from a physicality standpoint, let's see. But I think the biggest factor is this is a McNick side that just knows what they're able to do. They have all the pieces available. We saw it last year. We're seeing it again this year. And even though they had those mistakes against St. Vincent St. Mary, it felt like that was a tune-up to what we could see tomorrow. And I think McNick repeats as champions. I think the Rockets get it done in three.
I'm in a similar boat. I mean, I was really impressed with Hunter Tops from Mount Vernon, but I was also really impressed with Gavin Gerhardt from McNick. What's the difference to me? Middle presence. Mount Vernon, I just was not impressed with their middles. I love the Mount Vernon program, but McNick, I believe, has been successful because of great middles. And when you have that to rely on, it just makes everything easier for your pens. I think McNick repeats and gets it done in 3 sets. Now we've also got Division One, Thomas Worthington versus St. Ignatius. What do you got for that?
I mean, this is the one game that, it's a toss-up. Yes, Thomas Worthington won that game at home, swept St. Ignatius in that regard. So it was a pretty clear-cut result. And yet I don't feel like this game is certain because a lot's changed, right? A week after that game against St. Ignatius, they went to Centerville, right? They were the third seed there. We were saying, oh, they should be number one because they just beat St. Ignatius. We both had them at number one in our rankings, and then they lose to Moeller, get reverse swept by Moeller, and all of a sudden things go a little bit wayward. And it's so interesting to see how that team just fluctuates here and there. They were kind of in that 4 or 5 spot in our rankings. It's tough because I think the one thing I will say is that how much will playing 5 sets affect St. Ignatius?
It's true.
That's the one question I wanted to see going into that matchup. Because St. Ignatius played well. They played really well and knocked off, arguably, according to our rankings going into this postseason, the number one team in state. Now the question is, can they carry it, right? We've seen that from teams like Moeller, right? The Lee Meyer Moeller teams were really, really good. I mean, it was their bread and butter to some extent when they were playing these marathon matches. And even if when they were down, they were able to come back, they were able to be victorious. And I think you always take a look at some of these programs, right? The programs that won, right? The three-peat with Moeller, led by Lee Meyer, a Moeller alum. St. X, right? They win in 2019, they win in 2024. Bill Ferris was on that team back in 1994. And you could say the same for Coach Dom as well. You know, as St. Ignatius grad, coming back to his alma mater, you know, he saw it from afar of this team winning a state championship in 2017. This is the first state championship without a GCL South team in terms of Division One since that year, 2017. I think Ignatius gets it done in 5.
Okay, another five setter. That'd be pretty crazy. That is just straight up Lee Meyer era playoffs. For me, well, we don't know exactly what's going to happen with Finn Rubin. I don't even think I talked to Coach Laws. I don't even think he knows, honestly. Today, and I think recently in the playoffs, I mean, he's just been injured, so he's been kind of like an emergency, like backup right side in case they can't stop an outside. Just throw a tall guy in there, see what happens. But Noah May in the middle has stepped up and he's done well. I mean, obviously he's 6'5", so it's not like he's small or anything. So we'll see if Finn's playing good enough to play in the middle, or if they put him on the right, or honestly, if he just doesn't play. To me, I think with the middle presence of Dylan Johnson, and I think with the skill and the pace of Kurt Buddy and JT McGuire on the outside, I like Thomas Warrington to win it in 4 sets. And now, I didn't wear this polo for no reason today. Well, one, it's just a good neutral polo. That's like 90% of the reason. But on the drive home, I thought of another thing to say. At Alabama, the standard is the standard. And what that means is we haven't had a good year in football since I've been here. You know why? We haven't won a national championship. We've had good games, we've had good memories, but we haven't had a good season. We haven't had a good season since 2020 when Mac Jones led us to a national championship over Ohio State, by the way. But it's just, hey, when that's your mindset, when a championship is the main goal, and that's the main determiner of whether you have a good season. Year over year, good things happen. That's how the GCL does it. That's how St. Ignatius and Thomas Worthington are starting to do it, and that's how the teams tomorrow are going to do it. I'm really excited to see it. With that, this has been Ohio Volley Talk, and we will catch you with the state champion coaches after states.